All right, yogis. So let's just start with the most classic here. So if we're starting with pelvic tilt study today, cat-cow is the most basic way the yogis learn, okay? So on the inhale, how about you don't do your upper body just yet? You kind of isolate the tilt. This is called anterior tilt. So if I had a tail, we were just talking about dogs, my tail on the inhale goes up, okay? On the exhale, the posterior tilt, the tailbone tucks between the legs. So that's your cat hips. Think of an angry cat, right? Or a scared cat. They round the spine on the cat, right? That's the posterior is the cat. The inhales the cow. Some people call it camel, cow, right? Or, you know, the camel, the rounded spine is the posterior toe. So try to remember that here, yogis, because this is how I'm going to kind of refer to it as we go through class. We'll keep referring it to something you're more familiar with. It's called pelvic tilt, anterior, posterior. And let me give you one more quick demo here, guys. This is one of my sprout trays here. So say you have a bowl. This is a bowl of water. If I'm going to spill the water out of the front, right, my pelvis is the bowl filled with water. If I'm going to go like this and spill the water out the front, anterior, right? It spills out of the front. Anterior means front, okay? And then if I go neutral and then I go posterior tilt, it spills out of the back. So posterior tilt makes the water spill out of the bowl. Got it? From the back. Posterior, look. We're going to do this. Anterior, posterior. Look. Anterior, posterior. Anterior, posterior. So there you go. Now, can we do lateral tilt? Now, lateral tilt left and right, right? It's just a side tilt. So you have your bowl and you're tilting it laterally now. You did anterior, you did forward, back. Now we do lateral. Got it? So we're training you to just feel your core. It shouldn't be too difficult. It's self-study. So I'm just tilting my pelvis to the sides, which means I'm pulling my right hip away from my right armpit. It's kind of hard to see right now. If I was standing, we'll do this later. I have you do this one. Got it? The triangle's a big one. See that? Go ahead and you do the lateral tilt in your table. Now you can add your upper body too. You know, that's not really a part of it. But what's nice is you're getting the spinal movements here too. You're getting leg stretching. It's not just pelvic. You know, it's come to my awareness after just studying the kinesiology. I wasn't really told this by anyone in particular, but pelvic tilt, you know, being stable in the pelvic tilt is so overlooked, underdone. And when we stabilize the pelvis, everything else gets more kind of stable in the middle. It's like the anchor, okay? Can we come to down dog, please? This is all core awareness. Today's awareness day in the core. We've done some classes really focusing on different breathing techniques, different core and hip functions. Remember the hip day where we looked at the hip actions? So then you're going to hold your down dog for as long as you want. So next pelvic tilt here. I'm going to bend the knees so my pelvis can move a little bit more. Cat-cow. I love doing cat-cow and down dog. It's really not done enough in yoga. I inhale, I arch my back. I'm going to call arch. That's anterior tilt, right? Exhale is the posterior tilt. Now I'm going to shift a little bit forward and back, kind of the plank, to get my posterior going. And I'm going to get into it. See that? I stretch the hamstrings big time on the anterior because my sit bones are lifting up away from the back of the knee. So that's lengthening the hamstring. So take a few more here. So this is going to be a little extra of this. We're going to go through like the poses, you know, like lunge and squat and even something like a tree, all these common forms. So you can really see, you know, and you'll start to hopefully notice where do you tend to go without being aware. So in down dog, are you more naturally anterior tilted or posterior tilted? Most likely your work is the opposite. So if you're posterior tilted in dog, which most of you are probably going to be because you're not that flexible, you're going to be a little bit more like this. You're going to work this. You get a good yogi, they're flexible, they're starting to anterior tilt too much. You go a little bit out of that. Got it? Can we do the lateral tilted dog? So watch me here. I'm pulling the hip away from the shoulder. A lateral tilted dog. It still can be difficult because you're hanging out in dog for so long, right? Don't worry, you're going to get challenged, in this class. But I really want to hammer this idea home because we don't want just a good fitness class every week. You get enough of those. You got to increase body awareness. Listen, take it to the front, forward fold. So nice cat-cow, right? And now that we're starting to get into it, the first thing I want you to do, what tilt do you feel like you're in? Right? From my perspective, even me, pretty flexible. I'm in posterior tilt. So what's the stretch? What's the work? Really, when the yoga teacher says, okay, work on your pose, get out of your compensation, it's anterior tilt here, right? That's going to lengthen my spine. You see that? And then when I posterior tilt, I round. What does the teacher say here? Don't round. So you're working anterior tilt more so than anything, right? I don't even have to lift the chest. Watch. If I anterior tilt, it just takes me there. So I'm doing my cat-cow here. If it's tough, what do? I use the blocks. Anterior tilt, posterior tilt. Anterior tilt, posterior tilt. Now, if you're new to this type of work, it's a lot. So you don't have to do too much. Each time you posterior tilt, you are lengthening your lower back. That could be a lot, guys. So take a moment, and when you need, all right? Anterior tilt, posterior tilt. Got it? Stand up, please. How about you give it a little shake? So let's take our first twist. I didn't have you do the lateral tilt there. I thought about this because I injured my Achilles. Yesterday I worked out really hard and I woke up, my back's a little sore. I'm still kind of being careful on it. And I was like, oh yeah, that would be a day I'd work on tilts a lot, right? So how about we do standing tilts quickly, right? So posture, do you tend to stand like this? Do you tend to stand like this? Your work would be the opposite in the sagittal plane. Remember that you have three planes of movement. They are called sagittal is forward and back. Let's say coronal would be lateral. We do, whatever it is. This is the lateral coronal tilt. And then there's transverse. So loosen it up here, please. And then I tend to stand like this. My girlfriend's always like, look at yourself. I'm like standing like this, right? So my goal is here, which is weird because my glutes and abs are pretty strong, but I tend to still go here, okay? Because I sit too much in the car. So can you try your cat-cow here? You bend the knees, and you start to do that cat-cow. And sometimes I like to have you now, like, hold it. So which one are you imbalanced in? It's me, it's anterior, so I go posterior, and I'll pulse in the tilt. And it's also one of the best exercises for lower glutes, okay? So people do their glutes all the time, but they're hitting here so hard and they get back pain from the glute thrusts. And they're not hitting the lower inner glute. That's posterior tilt, yogis. It's posterior tilt. That's the lower glute. Got it? Lateral tilt, widen your feet, quickly, boom. There it is. You can't really lateral tilt very well here, right? You can do it like this. Lifting the foot, hip hiking. But you go like that. Now we're gonna go a little bit more. Watch this, chair posture, go. You do it all the time. You know this posture so much, it's your favorite yoga pose, right? So what do you tend to do? Do you anterior tilt? Okay, what's your practice? Posterior tilt more, right? Look how it made my spine long. All you did was tilt. That's why it's so important, because every yoga pose has that cue. Got it? It'll correct spine. It'll strain body less. So I anterior tilt, posterior tilt. Anterior tilt, posterior tilt. Then lateral tilt's a tough one here. Okay, and you hold your chair and you get your chair in here. if you're just coming in, we're doing like a kind of a special class that I try to teach, you know, once a year to remind people that pelvic stability and mobility and awareness is very key for your musculoskeletal fascial body. We always think hip joints, right? But and core, but what about pelvic tilt? That's more important probably than the hip joint. I don't want to say more, but it's more because it's less focused on. Stand up, yogi, step your left foot back. You can do other things, you know, you mix in some poses and stuff. It's a weird class today, so you mix in whatever you need to, and then you do it here. What are you in? Look at, oh, I'm an anterior tilt, right? So what do I have you do usually? I have you bend the back knee, so it brings you into posterior. Cat, or excuse me, cow, cat, cow, cat. And I can do it without moving the back leg. See that? I do 1, 2, 3, 4 there. Maybe I pulse and whatever I'm not good at, because I tend to be an anterior. So I pulse and posterior again. Don't worry, we'll find places in the opposite pattern, and then I do tilt laterally. That's key, because the yoga teacher says hit down, right? Hit down, that's tilt. That's why it plays such a big role. It's both tilts are basically in all, not all postures, but most. Front and back always is. Got it? Step your second foot back. Kind of, it's all regulars today, guys. Don't worry. We're going to hit the core. We're only going to do this for another about 10 minutes. I still want to show you a few more. So what happens is, usually a lot of times, guys, when people start to round the upper body, that brings them into posterior tilt. Not many people are in anterior tilt and round the front body. So another way to notice, guys, if you arch your back, that's usually anterior tilt pattern. If I round the spine, you see this a lot. That tends to be a posterior tilt pattern. So we want to shorten the back line, anterior tilt. And that's going to also lift the chest, like you've been seeing. It takes you out of the rounding. So that's another way to notice the pattern. You think that the spine, arched or rounded. If it's arched, you're an anterior. If it's in round, you're in posterior. So that's a good thing to know and remember. Let's do it again. Warrior 2. Left foot goes back. You work your warrior 2, just as normal, going through the poses, but making a core study today. What does the teacher usually say here? Slight tuck of the tailbone. Which, just say it to yourself. Now I'm starting to get you to apply it. If I'm saying tuck the tailbone, what's the compensation? What's the pattern? And what tilt is it they're having you get out of? And which tilt is it are you going to? Right? Because I'll show you from this angle so you can see. I just said it. If my back is arched and they say tuck your tailbone, look at that strong long spine. It's posterior tilt, okay? Okay, so you're holding your warrior 2. You can try the cat-cow. It's a good one. And then you can do your warrior 2 with the lateral tilt. It's not easy. It's going to be restricted because you're weight bearing on muscles. Muscles don't move as easy when they're locked in with weight, okay? So then you straighten your right leg, and this is triangle. What do they say? Posterior tilt on the average. Most people anterior tilt here. There's always exceptions to the rules. So once in a while, you see people doing triangle. You walk around the room, anterior, but then you see somebody like this. Their cue would be a little bit of an anterior tilt, but not hyper. Got it? Hyper means you really go to the end range, let's say, of further activation. So this is the lateral tilt. This is the one, the big one I always say deepest lateral tilt of class. When we do triangle, right? It's not really a flexion. See that? There's the big lateral, but you can work this. Second side, warrior 2. Okay, you know what to do. You're studying your yoga practice today. Like if you were to go through my yoga training, we would have a whole day on this, because if you're a yoga teacher and you don't understand this, yogis teach physical exercise, right? I say this, I hang out with a lot of yoga friends, and
luckily all the yogis are lighthearted, and I always joke, say, no, you teach exercise, not yoga, right? Do you teach union with God? No? Okay. Well, you teach exercise. I'm fine with saying that. I don't care. Exercise is important. And, we're all doing the right thing. And a lot of yogis have trouble saying I'm an exercise teacher, but that's what they teach. And if you don't understand biomechanics and the kinesiology and the myology and you're teaching exercise, you got to be careful, because even when you understand it, it's so complex, and there's so much context in what you're teaching. I always try to get people to study anatomy. I said, you want to be a great yoga teacher, just go anatomy first. If you're teaching exercise, you teach at Equinox with me. It's exercise yoga. You got to learn the anatomy. And anybody practicing, the more you're learning the anatomy, it's self-knowledge. That's yoga anyway. It's an outer layer.
Okay, we keep going. Did you do your triangle? Are you noticing your tilts? Are you here? Okay, and I was going to have you do the complex one, right? You can do the circle, so you can lateral, anterior, lateral, opposite, posterior. So I didn't have you do it today, but you would start here, you kind of circle in every one too. You see that? That's called the complex tilt, or the tilt floss by some people. Where I'm starting it, you can just pop through the poses, because I kind of meant to start adding this in the standing ones. Where do we always do it? Here, right? You can do that in every pose, and that's really I like to call it like the cleansers of the tilts, because you get too linear, life isn't like that, so you start to go here. Can we do one more? Warrior 3, warrior 1, 2, triangle, warrior 3, got it? Here you go. Okay, so we didn't do triangles, we didn't do much stretching. I'm asking you to be a little bit more intuitive, add things in. Bend knees a little, bending knees soften so you can do it. Inhale, anterior, exhale, posterior. See my cat-cow? Come on, slow down, work. This is really good core work, guys, because we want the hips to work with the core and the spine, to work with the weight-bearing legs. That's life. You know me, it's just legs. People say, what should I work on? Legs, glutes, legs, core. I barely say arms. I usually say arms to, on the average, that'd be a little bit more for females, because men tend to work their arms too much, and we got to signal weight bearing in the arms if you don't ever, okay? Second side, I didn't say it, but look, lateral tilt, it's a tough one, and then complex tilt. Ooh, posterior, anterior, lateral, posterior, lateral, anterior, okay?
What's funny is you get people new to yoga, they can't even do cat-cow well, right? And then you try to get them to do lateral tilting, that's really restricted. But then you try to have them to do the circling of it, and that's the one that's gonna really maybe break up some of the stickiness. Can we do the second side warrior 3? I wanna keep going. So make sure you start forward and back. That tends to be the easiest. And you don't try to move too much. It's just like any of the poses, the movements. You just try to find an inch in the movement. And further is not better at all, right? That's a big thing now in the Instagram yoga world. And, yoga's like entertaining and inspire, these big, to all the teachers doing the inspiring poses. And that's not the goal. You got to do some of that stuff on Instagram so you're respected and you get people following you and they believe in you. But that's not the goal for the average student, right? It's body maintenance and awareness and development and maintenance.
So, all right, so we did the first one, the 1 foot. I meant to do the tree too, right? So you go here, that's an easy one. That's an easy one. And then the complexity. I've had you do it in lunge a lot. Sometimes when I have you hold the lunge, and I'm like kind of circle the hips like that. Got it? So it's that same idea we do in cat-cow. I say, in the beginning, I say kind of circle the core, the hips. And then here, posterior, anterior, lateral right, lateral left, and then complex circling. I bent the knee more as soon as I went complex particularly. Right? So I could do straight left leg here, and here, but then as soon as I went complex, complex is actually a technical term, right? A complex exercise would be something like a pull, a twist, and a push all in like one. It's a very complex, it has like multiple actions and steps, let's say, rather than like an isolated, where you would just do the pull, and then you would do the twist. This is still complex in some degree. Can we keep going, yogis? Down to the ground, yogi squat. Add poses in, I'm not doing a normal practice, okay? Now here's the tough one, because your body's locked in hyper range. Where am I stuck? Posterior toe, right? Anterior toe is the action, and it's very difficult here, okay? Watch, anterior, posterior, anterior, posterior. Lateral right, lateral left barely happens. Complex. If you can't move your hips, how do you move it? You move your spine. It's like you're moving your torso. Left, forward, right, hollowing. See the hollow? It's barely in yoga squat. Next one, plank. You see, now you know it. Okay, here's a good one. Do you do plank like this? Do you do plank a little too much like this? I tend to teach this. I teach it's not the classic neutral plank. You know, I don't teach that with this one. I teach a little bit more like that. So here you try it. Cat, cat, cow, cat, cow. This is a closed chain exercise. It's very difficult to do lateral. So how do I do lateral? I hover a foot. Then I hover the right foot. So there's your lateral, and then it's the complex. I wanted to do this class like a month ago, and then I had it on my list of classes to teach like 6 months ago, and I kept pushing it back, and I was like, today's the day. You know, we need to know this, guys. I'll put this class up on YouTube, and I want you to go back through it if you're still confused. And I might be forgetting things. If you have any questions, you email me, don't be shy. I can get you some biomechanist videos on YouTube that have diagrams with skeletons and really nice visuals to see it. Okay, because I learned in anatomy classes and kinesiology classes this stuff. And we had homework and visuals and people, and it's not as easy. Listen, down to the chest. Okay, so what are you stuck in here? What do I always say? Drive the pubic bone down, so I'm stuck in anterior toe, right? I am, maybe not you, but I have to drive my pubic bone down. So look at here, I'm doing cat-cow on my chest. Not an easy one to do lateral, but you can. I'm doing lateral tilt right now. Here's the complex one. Okay, now I go to Cobra 1, cat, cow, lateral, complex. Okay, Cobra 2. This is usually a big one for a hyper passive anterior. So I say drive the pubic bone down. Okay, cat, cow, cat, cow. You don't really have to do anything on cat. If you relax, you're going to big cow, excuse me. If I relax in Cobra, I'm in big cow, right? Anterior, posterior, anterior, posterior. Very tough one. The lateral, I use my arms here. My right hip, sometimes when I lateral tilt, I pull the hip here. Sometimes when I lateral tilt, I'll actively go here. I'll push this hip away with the core. Lateral is a little bit more difficult to develop and clearly see, do, and understand. Watch the complex. Now, I want you to be extra careful because you're in a deep range. Anytime you're in a range, this is kind of the opposite. Look, stuck in anterior, spinal extension, stuck in posterior, spinal flexion. It gets hard to move in these hyper ranges, right? So it's not about seeing how far I can move. It's about body awareness. It's not, Okay, so you did them all there. Let's come back to down dog.
Now I want you to feel it through chaturanga. This is something you do all the time. So a lot of times when we do spinal rolling, you go down dog is really anterior tilt for the average person. Shift forward to plank is more of a posterior tilt for the average person. As you lower down, it's kind of like a neutral, but it's knees, chest, chin. You go anterior tilt. It's called anahata, puppy dog. I'll show you in a moment. Then you slide.
Some of you are waiting for me here. Look, you're stuck here. It looks like this: cat, cow, cat, cow. Wait, I messed that up. Cow, cat, cow, cat, cow, cat, cow. Or anterior, posterior, anterior, posterior, anterior, posterior, anterior. And you start again. You see it?
I'm not just shifting forward in a stiff plank, lowering down halfway, back bending the front body as much as possible, and then neutralizing them back. No, it's so much more than that as you practice, okay? Can you do your chaturangas? You don't have to do it right now. You can just get some chaturangas in. Yogis, I had to study the EMG charts. I talk about this a lot. Electromyographies. They hook up electrical sensors to your muscles. They have athletes engage muscles in certain ways. Let's call them exercises. And they can measure how much the electrical activity is in the muscle. The reason that this is so profound is because posterior tilt is the number one, I mentioned earlier, it's the lower glute activator. You can do hip extensions all day and lateral rotations and abductions all day. That's all hip actions. But if you miss the tilt, you're so low on the EMG chart and you're doing the quote unquote actions of the glutes, right? But posterior tilt is glute action. It's also reverse crunch, it's called, is one of the best ways to stimulate rectus abdominis, the abs. You know, people, you know, they're doing their crunches and that's like the top half, and they're doing their leg swings, that's hip flexors. But it's really good. If you learn that posterior tilt, which we're about to do on the back, you get your abs burned. So glutes and abs, which a lot of people, it's the weak compound. Everyone has like a tight hip flexor and tight quads and tight lower back. So if we tighten the abs, it takes pressure off that, and the glutes, it takes pressure off all of it. All right, can we do one more thing here, side plank? Take a little, shake it out, okay? You know what you're doing here. You just get in a side plank, and today, no fancy things, you know, lifting legs, we do 1,000 times, flipping it over, do 1,000 times. Now you try it. Are you in anterior tilt? You're in posterior tilt. I always say squeeze your butt. What does squeezing your butt bring you into is tilt? If posterior tilt strengthens your butt, and how do you strengthen your butt? By activating it. If I say activate your butt, that probably is a certain way of saying posterior tilt. That's a little bit more practical to understand, right? So, and then you notice lateral, right? Which lateral do you get pulled into? So usually they say if you dump the water out the left side of the bowl, it's a lateral tilt left. The goal is to be more in the neutral, right? So if I'm kind of like stuck here, it's hard to see, but I'm in a right pelvic tilt. So I go like that. It's a very small tilt, very tough to see. Remember, QL, deepest lower back muscle, is a lateral tilt. They call it a hip hiker. It's this. So can we do our second side? There is the complex tilt too, guys. If you want to try it, more so, I really want you to just really know anterior, posterior. You know the complex, it's putting it together. You don't have to do it. It's the most difficult part in this pose, probably. Looks good. This is like a puzzle that your body has to try to figure out. And you do it 10 times, and you don't think you're feeling it, and you can't do it. And then all of a sudden, oop, you got this little tilt, your pelvis goes like that in the lateral. It's a 1/4 inch maybe, that's it. And that's enough, and that's fine. It's not about seeing how far you can move. Most people have very unstable pelvic tilts. They just drop into these huge tilts, and that's that's the point. We don't need you to move too much. Got it? So you're doing your second side of your pelvic tilts on your side plank, anterior, posterior, lateral left, lateral right, and maybe complex. Pelvic tilt floss. Let's keep going with some of the classic poses because we're already about 35 minutes in. Now, you might start feeling this in your core because it's, you're lengthening your lower back, and here you're shortening your psoas. Anterior shortens psoas and tightens here. But again, I need to go through these poses that we do most often. So here we are. It's the up table, back to weight bearing in the arms. Look, weight bearing here, weight bearing here, weight bearing here, now weight bearing. Most people's posterior chains are too weak. That's why I teach so much posterior tilt. Hamstrings are weak, calves are weak, butt's weak, lower back's weak, upper back is weak. I mean, it's a serious problem in physical fitness. Even a lot of athletes, back line is really weak, really soft. So here we go. Look, here, this pose. Anterior tilt, posterior tilt. I'm just going to take my shirt off so you can see it better. Okay, so you're here, anterior tilt, posterior tilt. Now, I got pretty good movement here, guys. Might not look like this. And I'm not all the way up because hyper ranges don't let you move. Posterior, anterior, posterior, anterior. What's lateral? I'm lengthening my right waist, shortening my right waist. See it? So lateral is bringing the right hip down away from the right armpit, and then that. Got it? And then you can try complex if you're feeling good. Remember, we're in yoga core, we're doing glutes and abs mainly, hips and core. So knowing this will really increase your chances of stimulating your core more completely, safer, more productively, and just more functionally because the legs and the hips are working now with the core. So take a break there. Now, this is the other most famous movement, and it is cat-cow. It is anterior, posterior, and it's never talked about. So most people are like this. Where am I stuck, yogis? I'm on the back of my sit bones. My spine is rounded. That would be I'm stuck in posterior. So I got an anterior, right? And then what do? I go to low boat. That's posterior actively. So this is one that it's a kind of an anomaly. A lot of people, they get like this. I always say, they're like this. They're stuck in anterior, right? So we're trying to go posterior. Lower back down, pubic bone forward up, right? And then you sit up, and most people are stuck in posterior. So you want to go anterior more. Front of the sit bones, lift the chest. Posterior, anterior. Posterior, anterior. Go ahead. And your lower back might be sore tomorrow. That's okay. You're okay with you and your calves, and the calves get sore and your arms and the shoulders feel sore. But as soon as I tend to notice sometimes people panic when their lower back gets sore, because it's the center of your body, and it kind of limits everything. And it's only soreness, and this is most likely going to make a few of your lower back sore, right, all here. And that's normal because you don't do this. Anytime you're doing something new, it hurts more, it's achy, it's sticky, just because the body's not developed. But it's all just memory. The more you do this, the better you can do it, and the more you're going to be aware of it. And that's the key. Yoga is all about just awareness. That's yoga, okay? Listen, let's go down to the back. I want to do one more thing here. Now, what do I usually say when we're doing I say a little pop in the pelvis. See that? So what tilt is that, right? If a weaker core person goes here, if you can't see, there's an arch under my back. I say, keep your lower back down. Now that's my
common cue for posterior tilt. Lower back down, and then more posterior tilt. Little pelvic lift. Okay? Last few, please. And they call that a reverse crunch.
When I was studying the EMG chart, it was pretty clear for rectus abdominis, the highest electrical count, in mat form with no equipment, no weights, no resistance, no partner. The best contraction of the rectus abdominis, there was 21 exercises in the study, right? And these were all ones that had high potential of maximizing the contraction of this was symmetrical coronal or sagittal too. It wasn't throughout transverse. What's the best exercise? Front and back body for the abs. It was a double hollow body. So you hold the crunch. I have you do it all the time in here. And then you swing so you get tension, leg lever, legs forward, and you come back up and it's a little posterior tilt. It's called reverse crunch. So it's double hollow. It's double crunch. That's number one on the EMG chart. All right. There are different opinions, you get different people creating EMG charts, these myologists, and you get different results from different people, and I'm sure that is the case. I'm sure there really isn't a best exercise. It's good to do variety, but from what I've seen, that's the best. If you can do the hanging version, that's better. All right. So we're done there. Can we do bridges?
Now, we gotta know this one. This is probably the most important one to know it, because if you don't do pelvic tilt right here, it's like you're not doing anything. So most people go up into their bridge and they're in what? Anterior tilt. You see the arch in my back? Posterior tilt, anterior tilt, posterior tilt. Try cat-cow up here. And then I want you to hold your posterior tilt. I often like to say your cat hips. The tailbone coming between the legs. And you teach people to pulse and tilt. It takes the pressure off of the upper glutes on the crest down to the lower glutes near the hamstring. See it? Remember, guys, you're not going to feel this stuff immediately. I learned this 7 years ago now. So it's like, I've really taken time to develop body awareness. I didn't get it at first. Even when I learned it well and passed it on a test, I still couldn't apply it to the body well. It took me a couple of years, really. So, but it's one of the most important things I've learned in structural anatomy, for exercise and wellness, the pelvic stability, okay? Watch me here, go on your right side. I train a lateral tilt strength like this. How do we put weight on the lateral tilt in body form? It's very difficult, so I like to do this, look. That's really sometimes called like a reverse tilt, because I'm not actually, the action's not tilting, it's lateral movement, and then it's here. I have you do it like this a lot. This is one of my favorite ways to teach you the lateral tilt. Also, I usually save it for gentler classes, but that right there, okay? So you could do it like this. I meant to show you this earlier and I forgot. It's this little movement in the core. It's tricky because it's a very subtle tilt.
And the more weight you have on it, it's more difficult to move it. So last few here. And then I'd like you to just do your second side. Now, I've kind of leaned away in this exercise in the last two. In bridge, can you do lateral tilts? Yes. Can you do the complex tilts? Yes. Can in the side plank, you do anterior, posterior? Yes. But I'm just kind of breaking down focus for specialty poses. If you're in the side plank, what happens? People's tailbones stick behind them and they arch their lower back. So what's that cue? Posterior tilt more, engage your glutes. That's how I say it, or pull your belly in, pull your ribs in. If they posterior tilt, which is more rare, but it's when people round their spine forward,
You see it, sometimes people are like this, right? They're in posterior tilt. So I'll say upper body leans back, hips go forward, right? So, people who are here got to anterior tilt a little bit more. People who are here got to posterior tilt a little bit more. And then you do your laterals. That's how they both play the role. All right, so we went through bridges, we did core. Another way I like to train like a hyperlateral, again, they usually call this reverse training because I'm not actually moving my pelvis. I'm moving muscles that also control pelvic tilt. We've done this one, right? Where you do a crunch here. I just tap, 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 tap. And that is kind of working lateral tilt stabilizers. All right, here. I'm in a crunch and I'm just tap, tap. I'm tapping my left ankle, tapping my right. In the crunch, you feel your side body light up. So in essence, you're kind of like going like this, right? And instead of moving here, I have you do this a lot. Stabilize pelvis and move here. It's kind of similar.
That's another nice way to train the lateral, because we always do anti-lateral flexion, right? You hold side planks, you hold half moons, you hold triangles, and your body, you're trying to get stronger, not drop in so far and not let the body dump down. But now we're actually letting it go down and pulling it back up. It's a big hole in yoga. There's these certain patterns of movements in certain planes and positions. And you got to just notice those holes, like static hamstrings and straight leg hamstrings, never doing it. I talk about that. Glutes on the average person are weak from yoga, backline in general. People say you don't pull in yoga. That's the simple way of saying something like that. So listen, guys, can we keep going?
Straddle, open your legs, sit on your butt. Where is most people stuck? Posterior, right? What do you try to get them into? What's the cue? Anterior. So you can do this. You can have your blocks because you need some support, and you go anterior, posterior, anterior. Look, how's it easier? Bend the knees, probably, right? What's the way you get people to come out of this that are really tight? You bend the knees more. And you have your hands behind you. You have them sit up against the wall. So you do here, your hips are closed chain. It's very difficult to do any dynamic tilting laterally, right? That's tough. You can a little bit, but how do you do the lateral? It's a side stretch or side movement. So you do your so we're working out of posterior into anterior. That's really the whole goal. It's not to go down here and stuff, right? You can go down more than you work anterior, posterior. Right? Well, what does every yoga teacher say? Don't round your spine. Watch, I'm not even going to do any spinal action. I'm just going to anterior tilt. You understand that? You're going to, all your alignment crazy yoga teachers are going to love you because you're going to be a master at all those things. Got it? Pigeon. I'm just moving through. It's not about doing the pose a certain amount of time, and it's about learning this. And all the poses you do all the time. Okay, you're up here. I always say this is a very different stretch than this because this is what? Spinal rounding, tailbone tucked between the thighs. It's posterior. And then as soon as you go up here, I move the spine, it changes the tilt. This is anterior, right? So you could try it. You go in the middle. That's probably your best bet. Anterior, posterior. Look at the back knee lifted. Anterior, posterior. Anterior, posterior. What do teachers say here? Right hip back. That's lateral tilt. So a lot of people are like this, guys. I'm exaggerating, right? Right hip forward, right? That's where they are. But you want to bring right hip back. Right hip forward, right hip back. When people are in lunges, look, because pigeon's a lunge, look, the right hip's forward, we say pull it back. When we're in pyramid, I meant to do pyramid and I forgot. but you're here, what do they say? This is not really, just to be clear, in this position, it's not a lateral tilt. But when I'm here, it is a lateral tilt more. Got it? That's tricky. Because when I'm upright, I'm not going here. Even though that is a cue, but a lot of times if you're upright, teacher will say, okay, right hand on right hip, pull it back. That's a little bit more of like rotational qualities. But as soon as I go here, that all changes. It's the exact same thing when I have you say, it's this, guys, look. When I have you drop your heels to the right, it's rotation here. When I have you drop your heels to the right here, it's lateral tilt. This is the really big lateral tilt in dog that we do every other week probably. See that? That's one of the biggest lateral tilts in yoga, by the way. I should have mentioned that earlier. If you need to stretch out lateral tilt things, right here. It's this and triangle. There's a couple other ones, but they're a little bit more challenging, and this is an easier one. All right, so where are we? We're in the pigeon. Can you do your second side if you haven't, please? Now, one of my favorite things when you're doing the workshops, I originally created this because I was traveling to 6 cities with the Yoga Expo. And I had 450 people in my class. It was incredible. 2016. And they asked me to teach a few different styles of class. I taught an advanced class, arm balance workshop, and I did the pelvic tilt, okay? So, in all these, and I always did the dynamic in all of them usually, but I kind of realized it's not as important thing to really understand because it's just kind of like moving, churning your core in all the postures. Because we hold the postures too rigid and you're building up this kind of stiff posture. You want the body strong, but not stiff, right?
Okay, so you're doing that. Now, what do we usually do in the end of yoga class? You did a couple, we did the hamstring opener, we did the outer hip opener, did the inner thigh. The other common stretch would be like Virasana and spinal twist, okay? So if I were to go here, this automatically starts to lock me in anterior tilt. Like it starts to bring me because it's lengthening front line, pulling on the psoas. So as I go back, the back arches. So if you were to go here, you know what it is, you tuck the top of the foot down. One of the most fantastic stretches for the front line, by the way. It's not my number one favorite. My number one favorite is this one, but it's very difficult to do because you got to go posterior tilt. This is true triple chain. It's the biggest front body stretch there is basically for 95% of yogis. It's the biggest one you can do. You are in plantar flexion, toe flexion, knee flexion, hip extension, and posterior tilt, spinal extension, shoulder extension, neck extension. It's the biggest you can stretch your body. Remember that. This one right here is the biggest. Not for a beginner though, right? So beginners are good here. The problem is you're staying anterior tilt. What does that do? It keeps your psoas stuck short. So I got homework assignment for you. Do your other side. Try to do this in it a little bit. You got a homework assignment. I want you to go on Google or whatever search engine you're using. And I want you to search psoas, hit images tab. And I want you to look at the psoas. When you do too much anterior tilt, psoas gets stuck short. If psoas is really tight, it compresses lower back because it's anterior tilter, right? So it goes like this. What does a chronic psoas stuck short do? It weakens your glutes, reciprocal and abdomen. Okay? That's really important, guys, because if this is stuck short, everything is restricted. Every person I massage, most of them are really uncomfortable about it. Your belly button's here. I push in here and I massage deep in the abdomen against the spine from the front. I also do your iliacus. It runs with it. It's on the inner side of your hip, deep inside the hip crease. It's called your iliopsoas, strongest hip flexor. So I do that on pretty much everyone. And what do I say? So don't eat before the massage, if you can, 4 hours, minimum 2 hours. And we have to hit the psoas. And I've had people say to me like, whoa, I feel this big release and relief. because we're releasing this deepest muscle that connects to your spine, runs through the pelvis to the inner. It's the only muscle that connects your spine to your leg directly. All right. So posterior tilt releases hip flexors. You can stretch your hip flexors all you want, but if the glutes aren't working, it's not going to release the signal into the glute firing, posterior tilt. That's the lower glute. It's going to help release your psoas. Okay, listen, you got one more thing here. It's the spinal twist. Okay, so look at this one. We're always stuck in we're stuck here in posterior tilt normally, right? Here, we're stuck in anterior. Notice something? The forward bends, you're stuck in posterior, and you have to anterior. So when you forward bend, you have to posterior tilt. That's how you remember it. Got it? When you forward bend, when you forward bend, you anterior tilt. Geez, I almost said that wrong. When you forward bend, you have to anterior tilt. Forward bend, anterior tilt. Forward bend, anterior tilt. Right? When you back bend, posterior tilt. When you back bend, posterior tilt. Got it? Back, posterior. That means that. That's how it's the easiest way to remember. But the twist, what do we do in twists? That's where I was leading to. It's a forward bend here. So what would I do? I'd anterior tilt. Forward, anterior. Front, anterior. So I have to lift the chest. Most people are here when they twist. Here. The seated spinal twist is a forward bend. If you're laying on your back, it's a neutral because you lay your spine on the floor, but people still can go tilts. All right, so let's do our other twist here. This is more like a workshop class as opposed to being like a, one where I make you work a lot, which we do that every week, and I'm gonna, work you hard on Thursday and Saturday. But you know me, increasing our education, we don't want to overthink it, but that's also not good. Having the mind be too busy about it all. But just giving you a good solid go at this. We have it recorded, and I'm going to put it up on YouTube today. And then boom, you can refer to it. And it's a really good practice to go back through on your own. And you can pause the video and just slow down and do anterior, posterior, lateral dynamics. All right, guys. So listen, we got 3 minutes left. Is there a little pose you want to do? What's the biggest posterior still stretch in yoga? Cat is a fantastic one to hold, but if you want to use weight, plow. They call that like static weight bearing. Cat. So if cat is this, look at the roundness of my spine. You hold. Rabbit is the biggest spinal flexion, right? There's this. Look at that. It's cow. Chin, chest, spine, rounding, tailbone between thighs. And rabbit is a really big spinal flexion, this one. Posterior tilt is going to help stretch your back body, right? Anterior tilt is going to help stretch the front body. When I'm back bending, I want a posterior tilt. I usually say activate your back and back bends, your glutes, okay? When you're forward bending, you try to activate the front body more. Anterior tilt, psoas. I hope this all makes sense. I kind of threw it all together here, and we went through it pretty quick. And it's just planting seeds. You're not supposed to get it immediately, but now you're thinking about it. And next class, when I start to say some of this stuff, you've had a better explanation. It's not just like something I'm telling you to do or trying to get you to work on. Okay. So listen, yogis, you take a moment now to meditate. You got your gratitude meditation, you got your prayer, you got your mantras, your breathing, maybe, because breathing is the main core action. And then maybe, I do the question too, like anytime, big thing, remember we did this in Sunday meditation class. Anytime you have a question you're unsure about, You know, the yogis say you sit quiet and you ask the question, and then you become the listener. And what do the yogis say? You're asking your spirit or your guide, your angel. The scientists would say you're trying to connect to the conscious collective of humanity or all of life force. And then the answer will be whispered if you quiet enough. So that's one of my favorites. Anytime I'm confused about something, I sit in meditation. I ask the question. Hope you do it before sleep too. Then in the dream, they whisper it to you because you get quiet when you sleep. So can we do a meditation here for a few minutes? It was a busy, kind of fast-paced class. A lot of information, not too much structure. So let's slow down, close our eyes, and end with a nice meditation as a group here.